Welcome back, everyone. Let's get started on our afternoon agenda items. We're going to start off again with the policy board on the recreational sector separation and data collection amendment. The council and the policy board will review scoping comments received on the recreational sector separation data collection amendment, as well as feedback from the advisory panel on FMAT PDT. Chelsea and Kylie. Chelsea, I believe you're up first.
All right, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, Kylie and I are going to walk through the scoping summary for the recreational sector separation and data collection amendment, the public information and scoping document. So our presentation today is going to cover an overview of the amendment purpose and issues that were included in the public information and scoping document, followed by an overview of the scoping comments, and then we'll highlight the advisory panel comment summary and FMAT and PDT comments. So the objectives of today's meeting are for the Council and Policy Board to determine the scope of the action and to provide guidance to the FMAT and PDT on the initial development of draft management options and review the timeline for the action. As a reminder, the public information and scoping document was approved back in December of 2024. The public comment period for that document ran from January 23rd, 2024 through March 20th, 2025, and 5 scoping hearings were held as a combination of virtual and hybrid hearings. So the scoping and public information document considers 2 issues. I think I skipped a slide. There we go. So the first issue is to consider managing for-hire recreational fisheries separate from the shore and private fishing modes, also known as sector separation. And the second issue is to consider tools to enhance and/or supplement recreational data collection and improve the use of that data. So starting off with the first issue of sector separation, recreational fisheries for these 4 species include a for-hire sector, that's the headboats and charter vessels, and the private recreational sector, those fishing from shore or private or rental boats. And these sectors are currently managed using a single harvest target with performance and accountability measures applied collectively to the entire recreational sector. In many cases, recreational management measures, so bag size and season limits, are applied to the recreational fishery as a whole, but the for-hire and private sectors have differing preferences and motivations and different data collection and reporting requirements. So for example, federally permitted for-hire operators are required to submit electronic vessel trip reports and have expressed a desire for that data to be better utilized in the management process. As opposed to the private recreational sector, which does not have similar reporting requirements. So given these differences, managing the 2 sectors separately could allow for more tailored management approaches with measures that are intended to better align with the unique characteristics of each fishery. However, sector separation could also introduce complexity into the management process. And some stakeholders have expressed concerns that it would create regulation imbalances, potential conflicts, and perceived inequity within the recreational fishing community, and that it may require the use of recreational data that becomes more uncertain when it is broken down at a finer scale, such as by sector. So specific options for sector separation have not yet been developed, as we're not yet in that phase of the amendment process, but the scoping and public information document included some general approaches and ideas of how sector separation may work. The first idea in the document was separate allocations for the for-hire versus private modes of the fishery. And there are several ways that you could do this that the PDT and FMAT could further explore, such as through the creation of separate annual catch limits or sub-ACLs or separate harvest limits. And the second approach would be separate management measures or mode management, which is the way it was referred to by many members of the public. So setting different size season and bag limits for the different components of the fishery. And this is already done for, to some extent for bluefish, which has mode-specific measures. And then for summer flounder, scup, and black sea bass, they have separation of management measures by mode for some states at the state level there. In the amendment, there could be consideration of a more uniform approach to do this or guidelines for the development of these separate management measures. So the second issue under consideration in the scoping document is data collection. This issue has been proposed to be addressed in the amendment because managers recognize that there are a lot of challenges with the current recreational catch estimation methods and data sources. Recreational catch estimation for these fisheries is inherently very difficult. All of the rec fisheries for these species are open access, meaning there are not limits on the number of participants. For all of the species, there's high recreational effort with millions of trips and millions of anglers targeting these species each year. Angler behavior varies widely and can be difficult to account for. And there's no reporting requirements for private anglers fishing from shore or private boats. And recreational data generally has been a very prominent concern of managers and the public, with many expressing concerns about the accuracy, precision, and variability in the estimates that are generated through the Marine Recreational Information Program. And it's apparent that many stakeholders lack confidence in the estimates and the underlying data used to generate those estimates. So for data collection, there have been a few ideas suggested in prior conversations among stakeholders and managers. And so at this stage, we're looking for input on which of these ideas to continue to explore, if any. So previously, it's been suggested that mandatory recreational reporting requirements could be developed for all anglers, including private anglers and those fishing from shore. Other ideas have included alternative harvest programs, such as tag or stamp programs that are used in other regions or for other species. And those would require a certain level of reporting to receive access to the tag or stamp program. And the details of how this would work have not been thoroughly discussed, but they could be developed as a special access program or for all anglers. Another approach that can be considered is enhanced for higher vessel trip reporting requirements. If there are ways that we can improve VTR data collection or standardize it in order to make better use of it. Voluntary reporting or citizen science programs have also been frequently suggested as a way to supplement the existing data streams. And also, we recognize that there's been a lot of work on these issues along the East Coast and around the country. And the FMAT and PDT will refer to lessons learned from exploration of these approaches and other fisheries if these issues are included for further development in the amendment. So overall, the Commission and Council received 124 written comments on the public information and scoping document and 53 comments over the 5 public hearings. Many people provided both written comments and comments at the scoping hearings, and individual comments and those public hearing summaries were included as part of the briefing materials for this meeting. And in this presentation, we're just going to walk through an overview of the comments received on each issue included in the scoping document, as well as additional comments that we received on the potential for hire limited access or further permit restrictions, given the conversations at the Council and Policy Board level back in 2024 and the Council's decision to implement a control date for the for-hire fishery back in February. So starting off with sector separation, this table shows a high-level themes from the comments we received on sector separation. So overall, there was a fairly equal split between support for sector separation and opposition to sector separation, with 80 comments supporting further exploration of sector separation and 75 comments opposing sector separation. So while not all comments noted support or opposition for the subtopics within sector separation, of the 80 comments in support, 50 supported mode management, so not separate allocations, but separate management measures. 8 of those comments supported separate allocations. And in terms of opposition to separate allocations, there were 17 people that were opposed to separate allocations. Of the people who opposed sector separation, 7 comments opposed sector separation, but supported the exploration of separate allocations should sector separation move forward. 11 comments noted that managers should not pursue sector separation at this time and not pursue. These individuals specifically did not think the data by sector was good enough to support sector separation or separate allocations. So moving on to data collection, 42 comments supported enhanced data collection generally. Some of these comments supported specific approaches in the rows below, and some just spoke generally to, better or enhanced data. Of these comments, 11 comments supported enhanced for-hire data collection, 30 comments supported enhanced private angler reporting, and of those that supported that enhanced private angler reporting, some of those comments didn't speak directly to how they would like to see that, but 13 did private angler reporting. 10 comments supported voluntary private angler reporting using apps or other methods. 10 comments supported consideration of special access programs or other incentives for enhanced reporting, such as using the striped bass bonus program as a model that was mentioned quite a few times in the public hearings. So continuing on with comments regarding data collection, 2 comments noted that managers should consider alternative data sources and/or validation methods to improve data accuracy. 5 comments noted that data quality and/or use needs improvement. So rather than simply improving the volume of data collected, improving the quality of the current data. 10 comments supported required or uniform state level VTR reporting. And so the requirements for the state level VTR reporting differ by state, and in some cases, there is no reporting requirement for state only permitted vessels. 3 comments supported required tournament reporting or other tournament data collection, and 7 comments opposed additional data collection improvements and or requirements. So the last summary slide here is the for-hire limited access or additional permit restrictions. So this is the idea of whether the council and policy board need to consider some type of permit limitations for the for-hire fishery if sector separation goes forward. So 28 comments supported the consideration of for-hire permit limited access. Some didn't necessarily say that they supported full limited access, but supported consideration of something. 8 comments were opposed to full limited access, but supported cleaning up latent effort or other enhanced permit criteria. 8 comments opposed consideration of the permit limitations entirely, and then 2 comments supported considering the limiting the ability to drop and reapply for permits, which is one of the issues that the Council and Policy Board have discussed relative to this issue. So I'll pass it over to Kylie now, who's going to cover the remainder of the presentation.
Thanks, Chelsea. So in addition to the quantification that Chelsea just discussed, we wanted to provide some additional comments and rationale offered for some of these perspectives, starting with some of the reasoning for supporting or opposing sector separation. So there were a lot of reasons given in the comments, but these are just some of the highlights of the common themes we heard from the comments on sector separation. On the support side, many comments discussed how the for-hire sector is shrinking and severely hurting right now and needs better tailored regulations to help the sector survive. Many of these comments noted that for-hire catch is a small proportion of the overall catch for these species, but that additional flexibility can be very beneficial, especially for marketing purposes. Comments noted that the for-hire sector has better catch accounting and different standards and requirements already compared to the private angling sector. For-hire operations are businesses, and therefore they have differing motivations and needs compared to private anglers. Some comments believed that sector separation would lead to increased accountability of each component of the recreational fishery, and others spoke to the perception that it would improve data accuracy. For those opposed to sector separation, common themes included that it creates infighting among the recreational components of the fishery, that it's a win-lose situation. Largely, the comments reflected the perception that private anglers are going to lose out under sector separation. Some felt it was fundamentally unfair and that all anglers, regardless of their fishing method and fishing location, should be treated the same and fish under the same regulations. Many noted that the data is not good enough currently to support sector separation. Some noted it could create confusion and lead to enforcement and compliance issues. And then there was some concern that effort would shift toward the for-hire sector based on folks getting into the sector to take advantage of regulatory differences. There are some concerns that any allocations or targets developed under sector separation would be unfair. And many noted that private anglers contribute significantly to the economy, and management shouldn't do anything that may negatively impact that. So some other general comments on sector separation. Some thought it was a good idea, but not currently feasible given the available data. Some supported it for only some species, not all 4 of these species. So for example, supporting for black sea bass and scup and opposing it for summer flounder. A few comments spoke to the need to consider shore modes separately from private boats due to the unique characteristics of shore fisheries. Some comments noted that any discussions of sector-specific allocations for the recreational fishery should be linked to a broader reconsideration of allocations overall, including revisiting the commercial catch allocations. One commenter spoke to the need to have a socioeconomic scientist analyze angler perspectives and the potential impacts of sector separation. Several commenters thought mode splits should be left to the prerogative of the states, especially as currently is done in state waters for some of the species. So finally, there were some concerns about differing measures under mode splits, with some specific concerns about recreational season start dates being different between the private and for-hire modes. Regarding data collection, a few of the other comments that we received, a few noted in various ways that addressing data collection issues is really going to require more funding and resources to be put toward it, including for things like additional sampling effort. There were some discussions at the hearings about the National Saltwater Angler Registry, which is informed by various state licensing frameworks, but some noted that this is not very useful due to many states having a lot of exceptions about who needs to have a license. There are concerns that there is no sampling of anglers that return to private docks. Several commenters noted that any private angler reporting program, whether it's mandatory or voluntary, should be kept simple to achieve the best compliance. Many commenters addressed the use of recreational data, 1 or 2 in particular talking about how we're never going to be able to achieve perfect recreational data collection and should not be aiming for that, but should rather focus efforts on improving the use of the data that we have currently. A few folks noted that VTRs, at least on the federal VTR side, are already very thorough and don't need additional data collection components added. However, several commenters also spoke to the fact that this is not universal for state waters and there's better consistency needed for state reporting requirements. A few commenters spoke to the concern that voluntary private angler reported data would likely be subject to avidity bias, and that you generally have better anglers that would care to report, and therefore the data collected would be biased. In terms of specific information needs, there were some comments about how better information is needed on the catch location for recreational trips in particular. A couple other general comments that we received. A few people felt that the scoping document lacked clear problem and goal statements for the issues to be addressed. There were several comments about the need for increased harmony in the regulations between different states. Several commenters spoke to a sense of urgency to address these issues and a desire to speed up the process, particularly for the sector separation issue. And then there were a variety of other comments, many of which expressed frustration related to overly restrictive regulations in the recreational fisheries and a variety of other management topics. Moving on to our advisory panel comments, we held a joint advisory panel meeting of the council and commissions, both the summer flounder, scup, black sea bass, and the bluefish APs on March 24th. We tried to quantify their comments similar to what Chelsea presented for the scoping comments. We did have 13 advisors that provided comments at this meeting, and of those 7 had already provided scoping comments. So these tallies do include some overlap with previous commenters, but generally, in support of sector separation, we had 5 AP members that commented in support, all supporting separate measures only or mode management, and none supporting separate allocations. The reasoning provided was pretty similar to that, the reasonings that I spoke to earlier provided during the scoping process, with some additional comments, including that separate management measures doesn't necessarily provide an overall advantage to the for-hire sector. The ability to tailor the regulations can benefit both components of the fishery. Mode management would be about finding a better way to manage fishing for different groups' unique needs. There was additional comments about the urgency to implement these measures as soon as possible, and more comments about the data being too unreliable to use for separate allocations. We had 5 AP members that commented in opposition to sector separation, with one noting that if sector separation goes forward, separate allocations are needed. So Similar to the scoping comments, the major concern was that sector separation would be unfair and further divide anglers, and also concerned that it could become overly complicated. One noted that sector separation is not a long-term solution, so the uncertainty in the recreational data is going to continue to lead to regulatory instability. And then with the one comment in support of separate allocations, he noted that this would be needed to keep accountability separate, and if you were to start with separate measures and go to separate allocations later, those allocations might end up being biased based on the data that would be resulting from the implementation of separate measures. Let's see. And then some advisors also spoke to the fact that mode measures are already in place for current mode splits for some species and seem to be working well, and we should continue to let states manage their regulations individually. So for the data collection comments from the APs, so 8 spoke to support of some form of enhanced data collection, either in general or in support specifically of one of these subcategories. So of these, 3 spoke to support for enhanced private angler reporting, with 1 preferring mandatory private angler reporting and 2 supporting voluntary reporting. And that was due to the skepticism that mandatory reporting compliance would be good enough. 1 noted support for consideration of alternative data sources and validation methods to improve accuracy. 1 spoke to the need to improve the use of recreational data. 2 noted support for enhanced consistency in state-level VTR reporting, and 1 supported required tournament reporting or other data collection from tournaments. Some additional comments on the data collection. Some of the AP members were frustrated that VTR data isn't currently better used in the process, and there was a request for more information on reporting requirements for for-hire vessels at the state and federal level, but particularly across the different state requirements in order to make this AP member feel better informed to provide perspectives on this. So for the question of for-hire limited access or permit restrictions, 4 AP members spoke in favor of some form of permit limitations or limited entry for the for-hire sector, with a few specifically mentioning capping permits for uninspected vessels or putting additional permit requirements in place. But most of these AP members noted that participation in the for-hire fisheries is declining, and they didn't support measures that would make it overly difficult for new captains to get involved in the fisheries. So they were speaking to some middle ground between sort of fully limited entry and fully open access. So I'll move on now to the FMAT and PDT comments. We had a FMAT PDT meeting on Monday, March 31st. And this meeting was not necessarily to seek consensus recommendations at this stage, but just to gather some comments and feedback for the Council and Policy Board's consideration today. Regarding sector separation, the group was generally supportive of continuing to explore this issue, and they acknowledged that the comments from scoping were very split on this issue. We did not have comments on a preferred approach under sector separation at this time, in part because we haven't really reviewed or discussed in detail the types of data that might support different approaches and what we think might be justifiable. The FMAT and PDT did discuss the issue of future potential revised MRIP catch estimates based on the ongoing review of the fishing effort survey methodology. So this has been brought up in past discussions of this action. The FMAT PDT essentially reiterated that we can develop recommendations or options based on the data that we currently have and set it up to be kind of easily changed if things are revised. The group also noted that it is going to be difficult, particularly if the changes are more drastic. It's going to be difficult to effectively evaluate and communicate the expected impacts of alternatives in a way that might hold up into the future. So on the data collection side, some FMAT and PDT members believe that the issue of private angler reporting may be best considered separately from this action, noting that this issue seems a bit distinct from the other interrelated issues, and the group generally agreed that this issue is going to greatly increase the complexity and extend the timeline of this action, particularly for considering mandatory private angler reporting for these fisheries. Some FMAT and PDT members thought that this approach should be removed from the amendment at this time and possibly explored separately if desired. The FMAT and PDT noted that they will need to better understand state licensing and reporting requirements before getting too far into the development of data collection and reporting requirements. On alternative harvest programs, one FMAT and PDT member suggested that this could also potentially be removed just because there are concerns about the feasibility of this approach for these fisheries. Another member suggested that we should look into, at least learn more about the details of examples of alternative harvest or special access programs noted in the scoping comments for further discussion. And then enhanced VTR requirements should be considered through the lens of enhanced consistency among the states and the federal requirements versus just looking at additional data collection for VTR. On the question of for-hire limited access or restrictions, the FMAT and PDT generally agreed that the permit criteria this issue warrants further exploration, especially in relation to state and federal consistency. There was some support for at least exploring whether permit criteria should be differentiated between uninspected and inspected vessels. And there is a need to better understand the landscape of for-hire permit use and requirements at the state level in order for the group to comment on whether state level permitting requirements should be included in the draft options or just look at federal for-hire permits, including the issue of state regulatory barriers to enacting new permitting or reporting requirements. On the issue of the amendment timeline and the complexity of the action, in general, there was a discussion about the timeline and the issues to be considered. And in general, it's difficult to comment on that at this time, given the number of different directions that some of these issues and approaches could take and the uncertainty about what you all would like to see further explored. There was general agreement that if full for-hire limited access or some kind of permit capping is pursued, it will likely extend the timeline due to controversy and regulatory complexity. Some data collection approaches, so I mentioned this previously, but the FMAT PDT reiterated some of those data collection and reporting approaches could delay development of the action substantially, depending on the direction these issues are taken, particularly without a clearer definition of the problems to be solved. And then the group discussed some hypotheticals about if the scope of the action is modified or if the desired approaches are changed, is it possible that an amendment might not be needed? Could we do certain things through a framework addenda process instead? And it's a little bit hard to say at this stage specifically what kind of action modification might we be able to do if that is the case. There are some comments in this summary about which kinds of things require a framework versus an amendment, and major structural changes require an amendment, but more minor modifications might be able to be done through a framework addendum. And the FMAT and PDT can provide further guidance on that once we get a little bit of feedback on the scope of the action. There was a little bit of concern with addressing issues if something drops down to the level of something like a technical guidance document, as this could lead to future kind of inconsistency in the way that approaches get applied among the states in the future. And then I also just wanted to point out that there was a comment made during the meeting about while an amendment does come with certain requirements, it doesn't necessarily need to be a long drawn out process. And that is highly driven by the scope of the issues and the approaches that are going to be considered. So that's it for the comments from those groups. The current planned amendment timeline is included in this table with today's discussion highlighted. So as I just discussed, the timeline is a bit uncertain depending on the scope of the issues that the Council and Policy Board choose to address. So it's very possible this timeline could end up being shorter or longer. Today, we intend for you all to consider the scope of the action and what type of approaches should be further developed. So our next step in this process is over the summer, the FMAT and PDT would develop sort of an initial draft range of options this summer with the intent likely that this would be a fairly broad set of approaches, sort of conceptual approaches at this stage that would include some investigations of feasibility of the options. And then we could have the Council and Policy Board review these sort of generalized draft alternatives, potentially in August and provide feedback on how they should be refined and further developed, with the goal of approving a final range of alternatives for inclusion in a public hearing document by the end of this year, by the December meeting. However, as noted by the FMAT PDT, this might not be possible if everything is kind of kept in, and for some of the more complex issues if they remain in the document. So on this schedule, a public hearing document would then be developed tentatively in early 2026 for public hearings to be conducted in the spring of 2020. My microphone's going out. On this schedule, a public hearing document. So yeah, spring of 2026 for public hearings, and then final action would be tentatively occurring in the summer or fall of 2026, followed by rulemaking and comment period. I'm in mid 2027. So currently the tentative timeline is about a 2-year development timeframe. So for discussion today, the questions that we've put forward to the Council and Policy Board for feedback are: should both of these major issues that were scoped be retained for further development within this action? Should the FMAT and PDT develop draft options that address that issue of additional for-hire permit criteria? And if so, should this be considered at this time for both state and federal level permit criteria and requirements, or should this be only federal at this time? Should any approaches be removed from consideration, or should any other issues or approaches be added? And then any additional guidance the Council and Policy Board can provide to the FMAT and PDT on development of draft options would be helpful. So that's our list of discussion points, and we do have sort of a slide with just a reminder of the list of issues that's in the document for scoping. So we were hoping, in sort of preparing for this meeting, we had sort of hoped we would get some specific feedback about which of these we might want to further pursue. I think there's some concern about leaving everything in and keeping the amendment on the current timeline. So just a little bit of guidance about which approaches should be further considered would be helpful today. And I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Kylie and Chelsea. Who would like to start things off? Anna?
Thank you. First of all, I really want to congratulate the staff. They did a great job with this. The feedback from the comments that we received were, some of them were funny. Most were phenomenally thoughtful and kind of across the board, and gave me, quite a few things to think about that I had actually not previously thought about. So I applaud the folks that gave us a public comment. They did a really nice job. Can you put that list back? So in general, my personal feelings is that I actually think that the two issues of recreational data collection and recreational sector separation should be separated. It's just my personal opinion. I think they're related but not tied to each other, and they're both fairly complicated. And in terms of separate management measures for each sector, the idea of mode management, I certainly think that should be further developed. In terms of separate allocations, I would like to see an analysis of sort of historic harvest by mode. Also, I think there was some comments where folks have discussed the need to sort of have an analysis of the latent permits and active permits and all sort of that together. I would like to see sort of the analysis of historic catch for the charter industry, sort of short term and longer term. Not because I think that separate ACLs is where we need to go, but we're often asked kind of what information we need to have a thoughtful discussion. And for me, that is one of the pieces that I'd like to look at. In terms of stuff that maybe doesn't need to be in there, my gut tells me that a harvest tag program is probably not going to work very well, but I would sort of leave that for other folks. Enhanced for higher VTR requirements, I'm sure that will come up. Enhanced requirements for charter permits is something that I would be interested in having the FMAT consider. We had some ideas discussed in public comments that folks offered. I'm not sure that all of those would be feasible. You look confused. Did I confuse you? No? Yeah, okay. Let me see if I had other notes. In terms of any permit changes applying to state and federal, my gut tells me that applying any sector-specific permit requirements would make more sense just for the federal permits to avoid possible loopholes. But and I'll stop there and I'll jump back in when folks have had a chance to speak.
Doug Haymans.
Thank you. Got me on the phone?
Yes, sound good.
Okay, thank you. So first a question and then a comment if I could. Back during the AP, I asked if it was possible to separate the comments for and against based on the sector that was making the comment. And as I didn't see any in the presentation, there it is. Well, that's what I'd like to see.
Yeah,
Yep,
we have
exactly what I was thinking.
we have
Go
a
ahead, I'm sorry.
couple backup slides on this. Chelsea, do you want to?
Doug, for sector separation or data collection, we can briefly walk through each of the slides that we have. This was a little bit more challenging than we initially thought, just given not everyone stated what type of organization they represented or what sector they may or may not be speaking on behalf of. But we did our best here for those folks that did state an affiliation to separate it out by sector.
Yeah, and I greatly appreciate that. And that's exactly what I thought we would see. And probably worth some discussion moving forward. But a couple of comments. So I agree with Anna that if both of these issues are going to continue, I would prefer to see them separated out. Specifically the sector separation. I don't believe that there's any bigger issue facing the commission or the councils as a whole as there is in separating the recreational angling public into separate sectors and separating seasons, bag limits, areas, and all those other things. We tackled this at the South Atlantic several years ago, and now it's making its way back around. We've had discussions at the commission level about in-person versus virtual meetings and the importance of which topics we would actually handle in person. And to me, this is a prime example of that. Or at least for those on the South Atlantic Council that are sitting here on this commission, and for the commission members who know me, they know that this is an issue that's I feel particularly strongly about, and would much rather. And I guess all of the states are members of the commission. I would rather see us sit around a commission table in person, and I know can't do it in May, but at some future meeting, and to hammer out the merits of sector separation as opposed to doing it as we are now with some of the members not present. Regarding better data, we always want better data. I'm all for ways of trying to collect data, whether that's mandatory reporting or some other form. I'm for that, but I don't want to see these two go together if we can help it. Thank you.
Jason McNamee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think maybe I'll start off by, similar comments to Doug, and I think it was Anna. The idea of splitting, these things are totally related. I'm not suggesting they're not. And I think originally when we started to talk about this data collection piece, it was more integrated with the sector separation. It seems to have drifted a little bit. in my view. And so some of the things that are discussed here, you know, they can stand on their own. And additionally, I think there may be some work, at least there had been some work going on at the federal level with respect to some of this stuff, like for instance, how to integrate, you know, some of the private angler data recording that's going on with MRIP and things. I think people are thinking about that at the federal level. So that might be worth investigating, number one. But the long and the short of it is, you know, issue one by itself is challenging enough. I think splitting off the data piece, which again, I'm not saying it's not important. It's very important and it is related. But I think it can have its own timeline. So I wanted to make that comment. And then on the recreational sector separation, I really enjoyed kind of looking through the comments. I participated in the Rhode Island hearing on this and thought the discussion was fantastic. And there's actually been a ton of progress, which was great to see, you know, folks kind of agreeing in parts that they definitely were not agreeing on in the past. So that was really great to see in my view. So aside from those comments, so, you know, all of these things are important. I'd like to see them, these issue one items, I'd like to see them carry forward. You know, this mode management, the way that I'm kind of interpreting that now is we're sort of doing that. So I was kind of like wondering, why does it need to be in the document? We kind of do that, you know, on an ad hoc basis already, but maybe the idea is to set some like higher level sideboards on what's going on there. And so I would be supportive of that. And so, you know, came around to wanting to see that persist in the document. And then on the thornier issue here of the allocations, and I think it's on here and it's the little part that says sublimits. That's the way that I've been thinking about this. I think it kind of shoots the middle on some of the things that people are most, you know, at odds over. And so sublimits I kind of had in my head as a sub ACL. And so you have the recreational allocation as a whole, and then within that you have this sub ACL that is the party and charter sector. And you know, we kind of set that as a soft target and you know, develop their management around that. And it goes a little bit over, it goes a little bit under. That's okay. It's not like a hard allocation at this point. But then kind of similar to what we talked about this morning, over, you know, people were concerned about the data and the information and historical data and all of that. And so this gives us that opportunity to kind of generate that information that we need, you know, if we ever want to get to that point where we have actual separate allocations, we'll have that data. We're improving the accountability on the for-hire side, you know, through the things that are being discussed in the document. So yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit of detail to that part of it, because for me, that part's really important. And I definitely want that to stay in there, and wanted to give you a few of my thoughts on that. So thanks for the time.
Megan Ware.
I think it's helpful to have a table with each state permitting requirements and reporting.
Megan, we're having a hard time hearing you. I don't know. It's something on your mic end. It sounds like you're coming in and out.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, hopefully. I'm sorry, I'm doing this in the car. So I was just saying it would be helpful to get a table with the for-hire permitting and reporting requirements for each state, so that we can understand if each state can define the for-hire population and then understand where each state is at. I have some questions about that in Maine, but curious states are at. And then I think it will be really helpful, particularly for states that I'm calling on the edge. I think Maine is one of those where we're really impacted by this by bluefish and not many of the other species. Understanding if there are changes at the state level proposed, what species is it for? If you just sit on bluefish, is it just for that species? Is this broader to all species? So states have a better understanding, again, particularly for states on the edge here, of what the implications could be. And then at this point, I'd probably not move forward mandatory private reporting. And I think those are all my comments. Thanks for your patience.
Chairman Bellavance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to wait and hear a little bit. So all these species are really important to the New England area, and I think there's a lot of support and a lot of appreciation for the council and the commission taking on this overall recreational reform initiative, and the way it's been progressing over time, I think has really been well received by the recreational fishing community in Rhode Island. So I thank you all for that. Regarding the sector separation amendment and the data collection part, I just had a couple of thoughts. One of the things that I thought was loud and clear when I went to the hearings up in my area was the need for speed. The for-hire fleet is, and that was actually brought up in the ecosystem report yesterday with Sarah. The drivers of a decline in effort diversity in the recreational fisheries driven by the for-hire trips going down, and it's reducing the range of opportunities for recreational fishermen. So I think it's important that we address, this issue quickly if we can. So one of the things I'd like to see are the different timelines, if there would be any different timelines for different types of actions and groups of ideas that could be pushed through quicker, and maybe some that would take a longer time. So that would be one thing I would suggest. I also think I agreed with the FMAT and the PDT's recommendation for the VTRs for the for-hire fleet, and I think it should focus on consistency across the states as opposed to adding new data elements to the existing VTRs that we have now. And maybe one exception to that would be considering a did not fish report for all the VTRs that we do. And then one other thought I had was if there's ways to easily identify a for-hire vessel and vessel trip, if we do get disparate regulations at some point, just trying to think of ways to get at some of the public comments that had concerns about folks bouncing back and forth between sectors. So dealing with ways to identify a for-hire trip, would be something maybe you could look at. And then the latent permits that have accumulated over the years, folks that aren't reporting now, figuring out if they're truly non-fishermen or if they're just involved in other fisheries, and coming up with solutions to try to address that latent permit effort in a way to kind of control the fleet a little bit. So those are my first thoughts. And again, I appreciate the time to have a few words.
Chris Pat Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it's just a few thoughts, kind of sharing some of the thoughts others had. I think, yeah, there might be some merit for splitting out these two issues, especially to Rick Bellavance's observation of some public want, to address this sooner rather than later as far as sector separation. The recreational data collection and use, there's a lot there right now. As echoes some of the other comments of supporting removing the mandatory recreational reporting issue. That's a really heavy lift, time and resource intensive. I don't think we really don't know what it would produce. We're kind of have a similar challenge in North Carolina where we have to do this. And we've been very upfront with the public as far as managing expectations with what kind of information we're going to get out of it and how we're going to be able to use it when you think about just the inherent low compliance with mandatory reporting for much smaller fisheries than what we're considering here and what North Carolina is going to have to do. And yeah, just a couple other, just support some other ideas, at least on the recreational data collection side of this, is a stamp program may not be worth it with fisheries of this size that we're considering. And tournament reporting, initially when we talked about this years ago, I wasn't in support of it, but I think if it's used for enhanced data collection, that there could be some that could be worth exploring. And some tournaments already collect a good amount of information just for their record keeping anyway. So it might be just another way to tap into some stuff that we've talked about even earlier this morning about more information we need to manage these recreational fisheries. That might be a particular way to get that. Anyways, that's my thoughts for now. Thanks.
Adam Nowalski.
Thank you very much. I support the ongoing work for mode management, specifically with regards to differing measures. Would hold off on throwing my support completely behind certain management outcomes until I saw what we were able to develop and what the implications of what that would be. I do think the non-for-hire sector has appropriately recognize that this is a zero-sum game, and that if we're going to do something that affects the number of fish that come out of the water and mortality, that they're going to have to come from somewhere. So I think that's a realistic expectation. But I think the conversation about mode management should start with the development of a needs analysis of the different modes, particularly the private recreational angler, the for-hire angler, and the shore-based angler. And I focus on the term angler in each of those cases, things that we'd be looking at on the shore mode. They have access restrictions, they have limited selectivity issues regarding what species come close enough to the beach, rivers, etc., for them to harvest. For-hire modes got issues around stability, the need to plan, have a diversity of open seasons that they can fish through. But my focus on that angler is we've heard numerous times around this table about how the for-hire side is somehow more akin to the commercial fishing industry. And I certainly think there's merit there in that the for-hire fisherman is deriving an income from pursuing these species, as is the commercial fisherman. But the commercial fisherman generally indicates that the rationale for keeping them in business is largely because they are producing something, i.e., access to fish in a fish market that a lot of people don't have access to, whether they're in the Midwest or wherever. And I agree with that sentiment. So we're essentially looking to promote commercial fishing, keep it in business because it's generating a need for the rest of the country. On the for-hire side, I view the for-hire operator in a similar way, in that they carry recreational anglers, and what the job of the for-hire operator is to provide access to those anglers that can't seek out fishing opportunities themselves, either on their own boat, either on other people's boats, take themselves fishing at the shore. So our need is to keep that for-hire industry viable in order to meet the needs of the recreational angling community. And that's what we should be defining, that the for-hire mode is a need of recreational anglers. Without the for-hire sector, recreational anglers, a certain portion of them will not have access to the resource. So when I'm talking about defining these modes with the anglers, that's the type of definition I think we need to get down. Only once we have that down, only once we all agree to what we're trying to achieve, can we then start to define pros and cons, define what those different measures would look like, and decide which Peter we're going to rob to pay which Paul. Thank you.
Erica Burgess.
Thank you for recognizing me. I share some of the sentiments that have already been expressed, and I'm going to add on to what Adam just offered is I think the primary thing that needs to happen for either of these to move forward is defining what the problem is. I support splitting them because I believe the problems are likely completely different. But I think we need to clearly identify what problem each issue needs to be addressed and agree upon that before moving forward. We have to responsibly use our time, the time of staff, commission and council resources as we undertake consideration of management changes and management of our fisheries here at the council and at ASMFC. So I would encourage us to first resolve that before we direct staff to do additional work. Thank you.
Nicola Meserve.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do think that we're at the point where it's time to have a really comprehensive discussion about recreational sector separation. It's clearly a very divisive issue between between the modes, and I expect based on our history in Massachusetts of considering mode specific regulations that it is probably divisive even within the modes. Not every for-hire operator has the same motivations and needs as the other one. But part of my interest in looking at sector separation and mode management in particular is to put some additional criteria on how states can use it or the type of for-hire permitting and reporting requirements that may be necessary for states to use it. And so for that reason, I would be uncomfortable divorcing the for-hire reporting requirements and for-hire permitting criteria issues from an action item that is looking at sector separation. Those I think are really interrelated and need to be considered together. But I agree that the other data collection issues could be a separate topic. Thank you.
Michelle DeVault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like Erica, I'm going to agree with some of the sentiments that have been expressed before. I do think, I appreciate what Nicholas said about how to separate, or which elements of data collection to separate, and certainly those that would inform, further discussion of mode management and sector separation. I want to see those included. I definitely appreciate the Megan's comment about, understanding and having a table of for-hire permitting and reporting requirements. I think that will be helpful. So I think the conversation about mode management certainly needs to continue and move forward. I think with respect to some of the other data collection items, there is a wealth of existing information out there. 15 years ago, the South Atlantic Council convened an ad hoc data committee, and one of the first things that we did was look at all of the existing information on different, harvest tag and stamp programs, and even progress to looking at, wildlife data collection programs. And so and many of those are in the state of Florida, as Erica well knows. So I would encourage, at least creating a repository of information that, the FMAM-PDT can take a look at. The National Academy's study from 2021, which examined, data and reporting for recreational fisheries, also re-examined, the universe of those types of programs as well. I do think that there may be some other alternatives to test out potential voluntary reporting programs that could be very narrowly focused on a specific piece of information, such as obtaining better information on discards. You know, some of those programs already exist. Exempted fishing permits could be used to do that. Again, in the South Atlantic, the state of Florida, the FWC has several programs underway, you know, through EFPs to look at things like that. So I think just making sure that there's at least a repository of that information, and that if I agree with Chris Bat-Savage that mandatory private recreational reporting would be a heavy lift and is likely just untenable. But, you know, there may be some very focused programs that we may be interested in undertaking. And then I think, like, finally, I do really think it will be important to, you know, as Adam alluded to and Erica followed up with, just clarify, identify the goals and objectives moving forward. And I think, you know, many members of the for hire fishing community spoke to what they felt some of the objectives would be that could be met through continued conversation of mode management. I think we need to consolidate all of that. So thank you.
Mike Luisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't be long. There have been way too many people that have spoken for me to try to go back and remember what everyone said and support this or that. So I'm just going to offer a few thoughts on my own. So I think that these two issues are probably the most important issues that we're going to deal with in the next 5 to 10 years. I mean, we've been waiting to have these discussions. We had to postpone this concept of exploring sector separation years ago. I'm very excited that we're at this point in time that we can start to evaluate how this moves forward. But looking at these two issues together is overwhelming for me. I personally think separating them would be the right thing to do. Not only just due to the complexity of each issue, but I think by keeping them together, it creates a false sense that one is going to inform the other, that enhancement of recreational data is going to be something that will go into and help develop the sector separation or the mode management alternatives and you can't do them both at the same time. So I just think by separating them, that simplifies it. I'm all for looking into the details of what mode management looks like. I think that if we ultimately end up with mode management scenarios and we vote them into our management, it's going to be precedent setting. Not only it's going to start to take root, and we're going to see it more and more. These concepts about for hire versus private anglers are going to, you know, we're going to continue having these conversations, and so we need to be careful about how quickly we move through this. I understand where Chairman Bellavance was coming from about the need for speed, but we do have to be careful because this is going to start to set that course for other species as we move on. If you don't want to have people pointing fingers at each other, I think separate allocations is the way to go. That way everyone's responsible for their little piece of the pie. Just my thought on that. On recreational data collection, to me, that's like the idea about living on Mars. Yeah, it'd be pretty cool. It'd be great to be able to do it, but it's probably not going to happen anytime real soon. And I think my last comment would be, if we were to separate these two and work with the recreational data collection, I really think that the MRIP program and how MRIP are used and what these enhancements are needs to be really well understood. We could collect all the information in the world, and if it's not useful, then it's a waste of everybody's time. So I think understanding all of that first before we start to build on it is something that I hope that the board and the council will make sure that that we get that information first. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Matt Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be brief. the recreational sector separation and recreational data collection parts, I think there is some merit to separating them out, principally so that we can address the mode management or separation of sectors kind of in a more timely way. I think we heard about urgency from the industry about that. And I thought, that separating them out may move that along a little bit quicker. And I see the data collection part as maybe more of a evolutionary changes to be made over time that we can implement different parts of this in sort of an evolutionary way where we build upon one decision after another. So thanks for the time.
Paul Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to get into depth because Adam spoke really well about how I feel about most of this, but I feel we need to do mode management for sector separation because to go to allocations, I think the one thing I've learned about fisheries management is locking something in is something you live with and you regret for the rest of your time in management. So right now, the for-hire industry kind of at its lowest share of landings, and so I think that's a bad idea. Mode management is something we're doing now. I think it's a good idea to formally recognize it as a tool and to use it more frequently as necessary. And if we're going to do that, I think we have to look at least controlling for-hire permits. And if we do that, I can't see how that would work on the federal level. That's something that has to happen at the state level because there are too many operations that never go into federal waters, and we need to have consistency in state permitting and data collection. Thank you.
Joe Smino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I may have missed if there was a response to Jason McNamee's comments, or maybe it was a question about if we're already doing mode management. So I was curious, is there a notion that this is more, we can do it, but we're laying sort of a policy, kind of a standardization groundwork framework? And if so, there's another mode, right? And we manage to some extent some very niche scup and fluke from shore separate regulations that states use. And I'm curious if there could be further discussions down the road, if this is kind of a policy issue that from shore can be added.
Yeah, I think the idea behind keeping separate management measures in this amendment, at least for now, is like you mentioned, enhanced kind of consistency in the way that mode splits are applied, having some discussions about guidance or parameters or methods for setting those different mode split measures, which is currently done, individually by state and for some species and not for others and in different ways. So if that is sort of the preference ultimately, that probably does not require an amendment. It could be useful to have a framework or an addenda to do that, or some kind of guidance document. And I do think it is possible to look at all the different modes within the fishery to further separate them if desired.
Real quick, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was trying to be brief, but Adam did mention including shore-based anglers, and I do support that. Thank you.
Adam.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I see some hands up now for second bites at this. We've been going around for about 45 minutes with a lot of good ideas. What are we hoping to achieve here today? I'm not sure. I've heard thoughts about a lot of the ideas that are up on the screen right here, but we heard from the FMAP PDT that probably trying to achieve all of this is not realistic. So are you looking for some motions today to trim some things? Are you looking for motions to positively support something? I mean, where I'm at from what I've heard is everybody wants to work on everything. that's not going to really get us anywhere. I don't think it's going to make staff very happy for sure. So what are we looking to achieve? And if so, then maybe I've got some suggested motions moving forward.
I got one more hand up, so we'll come back. Chairman Bellavance again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the second stab at the apple here. Just
I owed you one from earlier.
you did, actually, you did. Thanks. So we're even. To Joe Semino's point about the shore-based mode, I'd started to think through in my mind that I think we need to have a process that defines the management structure in the for-hire side and then the private side, and I call them sectors, right? So the private sector and then the for-hire sector. And within those two distinct processes, then you could break down those separate sectors by mode if they wanted to. So you could take the for-hire side and have head boat regulations versus six-pack regulations, or on the private side, you could have private angler versus shore side angler regulations, if that's what those two sectors wanted. But in my mind, I think one of the important things that we need to try to is have two distinct processes where those measures are set separate from one another and aren't impacted by each other. So I would think that would be something that we could strive for. And then I think it was Erica Burgess that was looking for a purpose of the different actions. And on the sector separation side, I think the ecosystem presentation that we got yesterday had a pretty good definition of a problem in it. It said that the recreational fleet effort diversity has declined, driven by party charter contraction, and this is resulted in a reduced range of opportunities for recreational fishermen. So that's the problem, is we're having a group of recreational anglers, Adam spoke to that aren't getting the opportunities that they used to. So I would offer that as a potential problem statement as well. Thanks.
All right, with that, I think, Adam, you may have some ideas, because I think we need to narrow down where do we want to start first? We can't do everything, so let's narrow down what we need to do.
What are you looking for, Mr. Chairman? Are you looking for motions, or are you looking to just have consensus, throw something out and see if there's consensus for it?
I think we can go with a motion.
Okay. I am going to move that the board and council direct the FMAT and PDT to further develop mode management. And I make that motion for the board.
Second for the board, Matt Gates.
Would anyone like to make this motion for the council? Greg Hewitt and Skip Feller, second.
I am curious if these do end up moving separately, then I think a timeline is very important if we intend for that. If Adam, if this is just to move forward immediately, then I think that's clean. If there's going to be follow-up motions on the data collection part of this, then I think we need to make it, that motion will probably need to have a timeline on whether or not there's an attempt to move that forward at the same time or at a later date. So if your intent is to move this forward immediately, I don't think we need to state it. It'll just be on the record.
My intent would be to move things along on the timeline that staff previously presented today.
Chris.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think the issue is, if you just look at this the way you read it, and you wonder what are we going to do with the data issue? That's the timeline that Joe is referencing. Do we forget about the data issue for a while. So we have two parts, right? Based on the stuff that Kylie presented. Move forward with this first, get this done, and then go to the data issue. That's the timeline question that I have. So is it implied by your motion, Adam? That's the way you want it to go?
Are you referring to the separation between issue 1 and 2, the data collection versus? I think all I'm doing right now is trying to pick from the bullet points that were presented to us under 1 and 2 and pick something that I feel there is both the need to do as well as the possibility to do within the timeline that staff presented earlier. I think that's where I'm at right now. So my motion is not to definitively exclude anything else today. I'm trying to make a positive affirmative action to move something from those lists forward today along the timeline that was previously presented. That's my goal. I'm going to leave it there. And if somebody feels they need to add something more specific regarding timeline, have at it.
Well, we do have a few hands up, so I'll go to Erica Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I raised my hand to speak against this motion. I had stated before very clearly, and I appreciate that it was heard, that we need to identify what the problem is before we move forward to the next step. I heard it offered that the problem was a lack of diversity in the people targeting our fisheries. I'm sorry, the board was not privy to that presentation yesterday, so I'm not sure what it actually said. However, I'd like to point out that the bluefish fishery extends from Maine through Florida, and so I'm not sure that the problem is actually a coast-wide problem that might need to be addressed. And I'd caution the board and council from undertaking management changes to address a very localized problem that will have rippling effects throughout the coast. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Next up is Doug Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I can only agree with Erica's comment, but I raised my hand to ask the maker with regard to the use of the term mode management. So now we're going to go between sector separation and mode management. And I was wondering if perhaps we could stick to sector separation as the term of work here, and because I think if we go down this road of mode management, I'm thinking of that as separation of, say, the for hire versus the charter 6-pack versus the party boat fleet. And if that's the issue, okay, but I think it's really the bigger sector separation. So Adam, which I know you choose your words carefully, so is it mode that you intend?
My intention here, first off, while I have the microphone, would be I would hope that as a first step in the development of any of prospective management options would be that the FMAT PDT would work on the analysis, the creation of the needs and motivations that I referenced earlier. So that would be part of the development process from my perspective. With regards to how I would define modes, this is me speaking, and Doug, I'm flattered with your sentiment of choosing my words carefully. There's plenty probably around the table and in other aspects of my life that would choose to disagree with you, but I'll take that with great flattery today. In terms of mode management, I think I'm looking for the development of the needs and motivations that could result in separate management measures, i.e. size, season, and bag limit for the for-hire sector, including both 6-packs and inspected vessels, as well as the shore mode and the private recreational boating angler. That's how I would break it down.
Thanks, Adam. I think it is important to spend time on this. So, but in part, I believe staff started out, we don't necessarily need a motion. So I think to some extent, the question is going to be how comfortable are folks with the motion on the table, including the, what's expressed on the record verbally, or do we want to kind of wordsmith this a little bit? So I'll keep moving down the hands. Next is Michelle Duvall.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'm getting back to the point that Chris Moore made about, this motion speaks specifically to issue 1. I think we also heard support around the table for issue 2 with respect to some elements of data collection. And I think, Adam, based on what you just said, that this motion would encompass any data that are needed to fully evaluate and develop, this motion moving forward. I'm assuming that would be part of this. I guess maybe a question for staff, like when you all have had your discussion and were, thinking about whether or not these should be separated, and if they were separated, issue 1 versus issue 2, I guess what is the capacity to potentially, develop an option, move forward developing, I see this as like an options paper for mode management and everything that would be needed to inform that, as well as, an options paper for a separate, framework addenda that could be used to address some other data collection issues. I don't know if you all can speak to that. What is the capacity for moving forward with both pieces at the same time in separate vehicles potentially?
Chelsea or Kylie?
Yeah, I think staff, we're also hoping to get a little bit of clarification on this as well before we can kind of speak to the capacity. If we are just talking about moving forward with further analyzing and developing just separate management measures, that probably does not require an amendment. We could probably do something like that. If that's just based on this motion, the only issue that we're looking at, I think there could be a parallel process to look at some of the data collection issues. I don't know exactly what the capacity and the timeline might be. I guess it depends what that entails. It's like a white paper development or a working group or something like that to look at those rec issues and which aspects of those would be included. So I guess we're still trying to seek a little bit of clarity on what exactly this motion means. Is it just pulling that one approach out and doing nothing else, or are we doing like 2 separate actions? So I think Chelsea added it.
Yeah, I have just same questions. This motion to us says we're pulling sector separation out, and under that, we're only looking at mode management. So some clarification on if, I guess there is intent to also look at data collection, if those are being officially separated, how they're being separated will help us help you figure out what the capacity is to move forward with one, both, or all of the wants and needs.
Michelle?
Yeah, just as a follow-up, I think this is what Nicola was speaking to earlier, that I think there are some of the data pieces that we would need to flesh this out. And I think it's that, what are the for hire permitting and reporting requirements up and down the coast? I think that might be useful for this particular, for tackling this particular issue. Yeah, and I guess with respect to tackling other pieces of data collection and improvements and reporting, I do think that, and I apologize, I don't recall off the top of my head who all is on the FMAP PDT. I don't know if there's someone from the MRIP program there, but I do think that would be helpful. I think I've heard several folks, as well as FMAP PDT, express some concern just about how the upcoming changes with the program could affect this. And so while I would like to see us move forward with some pieces of data collection to see, are there, can we learn from some of the projects and processes that are already underway? I do think it'd be helpful to have someone from the MRIP program participating in some of these discussions to better understand what's planned from their side moving forward and when those improvements might be implemented, beyond the FES improvements that we know are coming forward. Are they going to have, reporting on 1 month waves coming forward soon as well? So things like that.
Anna?
Thanks. So while I recognize that Adam said that this motion does not preclude other things from sort of being added, I would say that it feels to me like we're too early in the process to start narrowing down. I think we've waited a long time to have this discussion, and it should be a thorough discussion. And I think waiting until August to have additional information brought back to us a little bit on all the different topics would be more what I was thinking. I'm not ready to give up any potential analysis on historic catch that might be used for an allocation or a soft target in some use, or a goalpost when considering potential mode management. I'm just not quite there yet. There's not enough information that's been presented to me for me to really start wanting to narrow the scope of this. We heard a lot of information from folks that they wanted, to look at the latent permits, all the other things that we've talked about. So if we go down the motion path, I think we're really gonna tie ourselves in knots for a while, because this is going to be one motion, but then if this passes and I feel like this is the only thing that we're going to pull out, then I'm going to feel like we need to start putting motions for all the things that we want to make sure don't get sort of pushed off the table. So I don't have a problem with this, but I'm not okay with just this. So I want to see the analysis on historic catch. I want to see the analysis on latent permits. I want to see more information before I start narrowing stuff down. So I'm a little uncomfortable with where this is going. So I'm not really sure what the next step will be.
Mike Louisi?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given Anna's comments and what I'm thinking and how I'm feeling about where we're taking this maybe down too granular at this point, I was prepared to come in and say, let's work on issue 1. And whatever's under issue 1 falls under that umbrella, and it gets further refined and developed. There will be an opportunity in the near future as that develops to be able to say, well, that might end up extending this for way too long beyond what it is a reasonable expectation of the stakeholders, and therefore we can start to trim things down. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to, if you think this is a way to go, I could move to substitute to direct the FMAT and PDT to further develop issue 1, recreational sector separation, and all of the bullets below that in the document. So I'll make that motion, move to substitute to direct the FMAT PDT to further develop issue 1, recreational sector separation, with all approaches described in the document.
Are you making that for the council and the commission?
I can do that for the council and the board.
Do we have a second for the council? Anna?
Is there a second for the board? Jeff Kalen?
Discussion on the motion, Mike Bentley?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I was thinking about this. I was certainly prepared to support Adam's motion. I think focusing on mode management is something that, you know, in part we know how to do. I think there's ways that we can further develop that concept, those approaches. I'm still a little hesitant on the idea of sector separation is including, you know, allocation decisions. I think are always very difficult, and I hate to see progress that we could make on mode-based management approaches sort of compromised by getting into allocation decisions that you know, as challenging as we know they are. But I was actually going to speak to something else that staff raised, which is this concept of looking at the data collection issues, maybe instead of as part of an action, maybe just a white paper. I'm not sure who would be the right people to sort of populate a small group to develop a white paper. But we've heard, you know, a number of conversations and other comments today about really getting a better understanding of what are all the data collection efforts currently, you know, up and down the coast. How are they the same? How are they different? What are the benefits, drawbacks of the various approaches? What are some, you know, developing tools or on the horizon, some tools or approaches that we could be looking at? So I would certainly support some, you know, a white paper as a way to address the things under issue 2, and then focusing the work of the FMAP PDT on issue 1. If we have to include the allocation issues, so be it. Although I think there might have been some benefit to just focusing in on the mode-based approaches. Thanks.
Nicola?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just hoping to confirm with the maker of the motion if this would, in his mind, include looking at for higher permitting criteria and data collection as part of considering sector separation. As I said earlier, I think the two they're really, the permitting and reporting are inherent to consideration of sector separation. So, you know, I can support this motion if I know that that is something that would be considered by the FNPDT. I think there's a lot of interest in getting, you know, a better understanding of the landscape of the differences between the states and federal permitting and reporting requirements there. I also have a second, you know, question, kind of an open-ended question as to the concept of mode management and what other people are seeing as possible options other than kind of some restrictions on the way that states are implementing it now at their own discretion. So it would be helpful for me if anyone could provide a kind of a specific example of an alternative that would be developed for mode management, because the way I'm seeing it, I think it's very separate from what the public was maybe commenting on in support of.
Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the question, yes, Nicola, I'll just say yes. My intent was that I think this is our opportunity to take a hard look at permits and the requirements that go along with it to get a better understanding of how the permit structure is, you know, dealt with federally and by the states. So I would expect that to be included in the development here, because I think, especially if we're looking at limited access and potential allocations, we're going to want to understand what world we're in and the people who make up that world that we're affecting in the decisions we're making. So that would be my intent with this motion.
Adam?
Thank you very much. I would like to speak in opposition to the motion before us to substitute. As I indicated earlier, the intent of my initial motion was not to preclude us from considering anything here today, but certainly one thing that I was not in favor out of all the bullets that was on there was separate ACLs and separating at that level. The public comment was loud and clear on this issue. those people that supported sector separation were almost exclusively, with some limited exceptions, in favor of sector separation only in the vein of mode management. There were some comments in favor of separate ACLs, but they were the significant minority on this issue. Additionally, when you look at the data questions that are before us, and again, not saying that my initial motion was to preclude addressing any of those additional data issues, but I would offer that the consideration of separate ACLs is going to be even more data intensive and more data dependent than the question of the mode management aspect would be, and potentially even longer to develop. That almost certainly rises to the level of continuing in this amendment process, whereas the mode management aspect, as staff represented, probably that initial motion could further be developed to turn into the initiation of a framework / addendum, because as staff indicated, there'd be a lot less to accomplish that. So for those reasons, I'm in opposition to the motion to substitute.
Anna?
Yeah, Adam, and I don't disagree that separate ACLs is probably not where we're going to end up. What my point is I don't want to lose the opportunity to have the historic analysis done, not necessarily to go through the process of separating ACLs, but there is an opportunity to use other tools that are disposable, like ACTs, to set soft targets that don't necessarily have accountability measures, that help us define the universe under which we're going to set that mode management. So you sort of saying that we're not going to look at that analysis at all is what concerns me. I don't think that separate ACLs is where we're going to end up, but I think the same analysis that would be done would be useful in informing if one possible path would be setting ACTs or another type of soft target under which we use those numbers to guide our mode management measures. So that I think that's the piece that I want to make sure I don't lose. I'm not so focused on separate ACLs. I'm just focused on the analysis that would give us an opportunity to set at least an ACT to then sort of set management measures based on those. I'm not necessarily looking. So just don't want to, not ready to start chopping analysis off that would help inform those discussions that we don't need to have here today.
Maureen?
Thank you, Wes. I think we're going in the right direction in terms of separating issue 1 from issue 2. One of the things we're going to have to decide first, actually, before we attack issue 2, is to see how we're going to divide recreational fishing into for hire, shore-based, and private boat. Only after we've decided whether or not we're going to have those different segments can we then decide how we're going to require each one to report. So I think it's very important that first we decide how we're going to divide the recreational fishery. And I think then we'll be able to more adequately address how we're going to have them report or have them not report and collect information from them. Thank you.
Do we have any comments from the public? Julie Evans?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Julie Evans here for the Fisheries Advisory Committee of East Hampton Town in Long Island. Our fishermen have supplied you with comments, I believe. And this issue has been a long time in the making. I would like to endorse, if I might, Adam Nowalski's comments and direct you to his first motion, I believe it's a motion, to concentrate more on the issue of sector separation or mode separation, however you want to look at that. So we are totally for continuing the path to figure this out. Our fishermen here on Eastern Long Island have suffered tremendously. And if you want to consider the entire country that comes to our area in order to take a recreational fishing trip on one of our wonderful charter boats or our party boats, that you are serving the entire country. And I'd like you to keep that in mind. Also, with the directions of your scope, we need to consider the economic situation of our party boats and charter boats. And I thank you for taking up this issue.
Hannah, can you put your hand down, please? Seeing no more hands, this is for council only. Are we ready for the question? Adam?
I think the board might need a moment to caucus. I don't know if you
That's why
want
we're
to
going
do
to
the
vote first on the
vote
council,
first,
and
then
if it
decide.
fails, then we don't have to worry
Okay.
about it.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand on the computer. All right, we have 10. Rich Wong did not raise his hand, but he is in favor of it. Everyone put their hands down, please. All in opposition, raise your hand. I have 8 in opposition. Any abstentions? Motion passes 10-8.
Okay, as noted, I'm going to give the board 2 minutes to caucus. Okay, if we could get everyone back to the table, please. There is a lot of conversation, but I'll just ask board members, was that enough time? Are there any hands that they need any more time? Not seeing any hands. Okay. So I'll call the question for the board on the move to substitute. All those in favor, and I will read out the states in favor and opposed. In favor, I have Maryland, Maine, Rhode Island, New York, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Delaware, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Virginia, PRFC, we have 11 in favor. Get hands down. All those opposed? If Garfo, Georgia, South Carolina, New Jersey, Connecticut, scrolling, and Florida. Hands down. Are there any no votes? Not seeing any. And, any abstentions? Not seeing any. Okay. Motion passes. The board 11-6-0-0.
This motion now becomes the main motion on the board.
You want us to go first?
Can do.
We'll have the board go first, and again, I'll call out the states once we get this up. Okay, there we go. So now the main motion, and I'll read it in again. Move to direct the FMAT PDT to further develop issue 1, recreational sector separation with all approaches described in the document. So in favor, we have hands up. We have Maryland, Garfo, North Carolina, New Jersey, Rhode Island, PRFC, New Hampshire, Delaware, Connecticut, Maine, Pennsylvania, New York, Virginia, Massachusetts. We have, I believe, yep, there we go. 14 in favor, hands down. Please, thank you. And opposition to the motion? Florida, Georgia. Rhode Island is, yeah, no, okay. We have Florida, Georgia, South Carolina. Are there any no votes? Okay, and I don't believe any abstentions. So the motion passes the board 14-3-0-0.
This now becomes the main motion of the council. Move to direct the FMAT PDT to further develop issue 1, recreational sector separation with all approaches described in the document. All those in favor, please raise your hand on the computer. I believe I have 18. Everyone put their hands down, please.
We counted 17.
Oh, 17. All right, 17. Everyone put their hands down, please. All right. All those in opposition, raise your hand. I see 1. All right. Yeah. Good. Put your hand down. Any opposition? Or any abstention, I mean? Seeing none, the motion passed 17-1. Now, Kylie, I believe you had a few questions you'd like to know now for guidance.
Yeah, so with this, staff was just seeking a little clarity on what now happens to to issue 2, to the data collection and reporting, if there should be, what's the vehicle for any further development, and what would be the timeline?
I guess we have a couple options. Mike Penny suggested the possible white paper on that. Do we want to put a definitive timeline of when we're going to, I guess, start working on option 2? Or issue 2, I mean. Michelle, do you have a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I definitely support the idea of a white paper because I do think we need a little bit further exploration, or at least, as I mentioned earlier, consolidation, or at least a repository of all the information that we have about existing programs. I think it's going to be important to pull in also the existing timeline for MRIP improvements into that. I guess in terms of, looking to staff and to Dr. Moore, when we could start on something like that. I mean, is there capacity to work concurrently to, develop a white paper that perhaps, we could see, I don't know, it's April now, October, December?
Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, thinking about resources, time, money, people, from the perspective of, the conversation today, this is obviously first, right? Getting this amendment to include issue 1. If in fact we want to go with the idea of a white paper, we push that in later into the year before you'd actually even get around to starting that, so that we can make progress on this. So if that's what folks are thinking about, that works. Yeah, so not forgetting about the white paper, but certainly kind of putting it on the shelf for a little bit so we can get through the amendment development, get you some alternatives that you want to look at, decide if we want to, deal with, aspects of sector separation differently. All that needs to happen. And I think that could happen first, and then the white paper would be second. Potential is that we don't get to the white paper until next year. So that everyone should understand that as well.
Jim Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think Mike's idea of a white paper is the right way to go. And essentially because it keeps the issue alive. If we don't do anything at this, it'll probably drift off into oblivion. So, and then let staff exactly figure out the issue one, and then they can come up with a timeline of how long the white paper is going to be, because the staff resources are limited. So let them come up with a schedule on that later on. Let's not prescribe that right now. Thanks.
Doug Hammond.
Thank you. I was actually raising my hand earlier just for a comment on the previous motion. I'll go ahead and say it now. I'm pleading with the board chair, the commission executive director, science director, and others. If we could pull this conversation to the commission table, at least the southern states would be very appreciative. I don't know the others, but as much as we could, let's pull this conversation to the commission table. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. As was noted quite a few times around the table and by Erica, there's a lot to learn, I think, from the southern states on this issue. And Bob, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but if this turns into a white paper and not part of an FMP process, then we don't even really have a plan development team for it. So we would still need to figure out who was the right group for this to go to, whether it's the species technical committees, which is tough because, again, there's a lot to learn from the southern states or a broader group. So I think Doug, you're absolutely right that would need to come before the policy board for further discussion. And since this is going to be a little bit down the line, I think we have the time to do that.
Michelle DeVault.
I think maybe thank you, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, I thought Mr. Hammonds was talking about pulling this issue related to development of issue one, the sector separation, that to the commission table, and maybe Doug can correct me if I'm wrong. And I guess I would hope that
you are
council
not
members
wrong.
would be.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
You're not wrong, Michelle. I was speaking to issue one. My hand been up for a while. And I realize it's just as important to the council on the council side, but this has started virtually and has been going on virtually for a while. And I think the cutting is about to happen. And I really would prefer maybe I just need to get invited and start traveling to the Mid-Atlantic meeting for one day. But there's value in person with these extremely important topics. And I just wanted to keep that up there, keep that going.
Okay, well, my earlier confused comments still stand, though, that I do think issue two needs further discussion at the policy board. Since we are moving issue one together as a council and commission, I'm not quite sure where we might go with that. And now, Bob, I may put you on the spot if you have some thoughts.
Well, my reading of number one and Anna's comments and other things that have happened is we're at the stage of some general analysis of sort of trends in the fishery, history in the fishery, what it may look like to separate out different, shore-based private boats and for hire vessels and sort of big picture analysis is what I view it as. And I think if there's we can have the policy board talk about it in a couple of weeks when we get together, and but mostly to focus on what other analyses would they like to see in this initial round of analysis. That's kind of where I think we are, and that doesn't seem to be like it would be disruptive or contradictory to what the council is doing. It may just sort of add, excuse me, add to it a little bit. So, you know, I think in response to Doug's question, we can do that. You know, put some time aside at the policy board and have that conversation.
Agreed. Thank you. And I see another hand up, Adam Nowalski.
I don't know what the commission and or the council has budgeted for travel of members to go to the other bodies' meetings. But here we are today where the policy board was invited to a council meeting. I think Doug's concerns would be addressed by council members being invited to a ASMFC meeting. I think Doug's point is just that when we have those ASMFC meets, there's many more of those people that are there in person that could contribute around the table. I understand it's a choice. It's not that anyone from the policy board was disinvited today. But I think the point from Doug was that when they know they've got 3 or 4 days of travel, they're more inclined to show up in person than for what could have been a half a day here in, well, at least for this part of the state, lovely New Jersey.
Well, those comments sound very similar to another New Jersey former rep, Tom Foti, who had often made similar comments. Thanks, Adam. Chris, did you have something?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, Adam's right. Policy board was invited, and certainly, you guys are here. Some of you guys are here. We've met with the commission, before. We don't do it that often, but certainly something that we've done before, and we can arrange to have it happen again. So, I'll talk to Bob and see, what could work. Certainly, if folks want to do that, we can make it happen.
Kylie and Chelsea, you guys good? You know what you're doing and need anything else?
I think we're good to just to explain it to make sure that we're all good. The FMAP PDT is gonna further develop issue 1. When we meet again in August, they will present their progress to the Council and Policy Board for further development and refinement. The data collection issue has kind of been temporarily put on hold for development into a potential white paper at a time that is to be determined and discussed at a later date. And then also, as Mike had mentioned, the issue 1 will include potential further exploration of permit limitations and things along those lines. So does that sound, anything else, Kylie?
Yeah, that's my understanding too.
You are correct. Everything sounds perfect with that. Joe, do you have anything else for the board? No? With that, let's, I know we're definitely still behind, but let's take an 8-minute break. We'll come back at 3:45. That way the policy board is going to be dismissed anyway. So that way we won't be interrupting the presentation. So we'll come back in 8 minutes. All right, if everyone can find their seats, we'll get started. We will now start on the gear marking, the on-demand gear framework. The council will review the purpose and need statements and the range of action alternatives for the joint New England and Mid-Atlantic Council Omnibus Alternative Gear Marking Framework Adjustment. Caroline Potter and Allison Murphy are both presenting remotely. Whenever you guys are ready.
All right, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, let me share. Look good?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so my name is Caroline Potter and I am a co-lead for this action. And on the line is also Allie Murphy, who is the other co-lead for this action. So today I'm going to talk with you about the joint Mid-Atlantic and New England Council Omnibus Alternative Gear Marking Framework Adjustment. Bit of a mouthful. So because today is the first time I am presenting on this framework adjustment, I'm going to give a bit of background that you might already be familiar with, and then we will cover what the plan development team, fishery management action team has developed thus far, and then end with you possibly initiating the framework adjustment and any guidance you would like to provide to the PDT FMAT on the action's further development. So the proposed management change in this framework adjustment is to provide alternative surface marking provisions for fixed gear fisheries in the Greater Atlantic region to allow the use of fixed gear without a persistent buoy line, and in so doing reconcile fishery management regulations with recent and potential future changes to Marine Mammal Protection Act regulations. Some of what I'm going to present has a bit of a New England focus, but the overall action is obviously joint, so bear with me on any of the New England stuff. All right, so like I said, the purpose of this action is to provide fishermen as many fishing opportunities as possible by increasing access to areas where persistent buoy lines are restricted. So what's the problem? Why would we want to do this? Currently, through the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Plan, there are several closures to persistent buoy lines for trap pot fishing gear. As you know, this is to reduce the risk to marine mammals, specifically the North Atlantic right whales. Because take of North Atlantic right whales is above potential biological removal, the take reduction team will be developing recommendations to reduce risk to whales. So in addition to current closures and in anticipation that the upcoming modifications to the take reduction plan will include additional restricted areas, this framework adjustment would provide an option for fixed gear fishermen to fish in areas that are currently or will be closed to persistent buoy lines. In addition to the take reduction plan regulations, we also have regulations that restrict the use of gear without a buoy through the Magnuson-Stevens Act and fishery management plan. So we're all on the same page about the specific regulations. In the next few slides, I'm going to zoom over the regulatory text that is currently limiting fishermen's ability to use gear without a persistent buoy line. And this text is also at the bottom of the decision document in your briefing materials as well, because I'm not going to give you enough time to actually read it here. So in the Greater Atlantic region, the northeast multi-species fishery requires fixed gear to be marked with surface buoys, tetrahedral radar reflectors, and or pennants. And that's it. That's all the time I'm giving you. Okay, and then because of the general prohibitions here on this slide, the previous groundfish gear marking requirements apply to any person fishing with bottom tending fixed gear. So we have historically interpreted this as applying to all fishery management plans, including for the Mid-Atlantic. Black sea bass has gear marking regulations, but it only states that you must mark pots and doesn't state that you need a buoy. And scup has similar requirements that pots or traps must be marked. And there are also gear marking requirements for lobster and red crab. So right now, because of these regulations, fishermen have to have an exempted fishing permit to fish with gear without a persistent buoy line. And something that I should clarify, you might be wondering why I mentioned lobster if this is a joint council action. Well, we're including lobster here to be efficient. And this is also partly why it makes sense that GARFO is leading this action. We want to use any subsequent rulemaking from this framework adjustment to also revise the lobster regulations. So all the gear marking requirements are consistent. So we're bundling all of them together. And then we would apply whatever you decide for this action to lobster as well. Because of this, we're not only working with you and the New England Council, but we're also coordinating with the Atlantic States Marine Fishery Commission. All right, so framework timeline. At your December meeting, you included an action in the 2025 implementation plan to initiate or coordinate on any joint actions related to on-demand fishing gear. And since then, GARFO formed a PDT FMAT, and we've met twice, once in February and once in March. Going forward, we will be presenting this framework to the New England Council next week, and we will present to the Commission in May. We will be working on the framework adjustment during the summer with potential updates during that time. And then we would hope that you could, and the New England could take final action at your fall meetings. GARFO would then start the rulemaking process with the intention that it would be in place by the end of 2028 to be consistent with the Consolidated Appropriations Act. All right, diving into what the PDT FMAT has developed so far. So we have two alternative sets with their own purpose and needs. Alternative set 1 is on the authorization of approved gear marking alternatives. So I'll just go ahead and read some of the slides. So the purpose of alternative set 1 is to establish optional surface marking provisions for fixed gear fisheries in the Greater Atlantic region. This regulatory modification would allow for the use of fixed gear without a persistent buoy line. And the need for alternative set 1 is to provide fishermen additional opportunities to fish in areas where and during times when the use of persistent buoy lines is restricted. And then alternative 1A is no action. So fishermen would continue to have to use or to obtain exempted fishing permits to be able to use gear without buoys. Alternative 1B would allow the use of alternative gear marking in all federal waters within the Greater Atlantic region. And alternative 1C would allow alternative gear marking, but limit use to restricted areas established by the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Plan. So before I highlight some of the discussion on this, I want to take just a step back and go over what is a gear marking alternative. So in the most general broad terms, it would be any alternative to the current requirements, regulations that we covered earlier, right? But these alternatives would be approved by the regional administrator based on their functional equivalence to those gear marking requirements, the current ones, which is essentially saying that these alternatives would need to do what current gear markings do. But this is where it gets a bit tricky because we currently do not have written down in these FMPs what current gear markings are intended to do. So, you know, it might say you need to have a radar reflector or pennant, but they don't specify, for example, well, how far away are fishermen supposed to be able to see that radar reflector, right? So we still need to further develop a definition of what current gear markings do to be able to have a benchmark for what alternative gear markings would need to achieve in order to be approved. But the PGT FMAT is working on that. That's not our task for today. So for your conversation today, we can think of, you know, for example, like on-demand rigged fishing gear as a potential gear marking alternative. And so on this slide, I just included some of our pre-existing visuals of how on-demand systems may function, just to put a picture in your mind. Okay. So now that we covered that, going back to alternative set 1. So alternatives 1B and 1C would not require any fisherman to use alternative gear markings, nor would they limit the use of traditional fishing gear with persistent buoy lines. So these alternatives would simply allow for the regional administrator to approve alternatives to current gear markings. And the only difference between 1B and 1C is the location of where the regional administrator would be approving alternatives to be used. 1B would not require that alternatives be approved for the entire region. So it's still possible that under 1B there could be restrictions on where alternatives are approved for use. And this is partly because some systems may be more appropriate for certain areas, you know, whether it be nearshore versus offshore or in areas with high fishing density versus low fishing density. So 1B would be allowing for more flexibility than 1C, but you wouldn't be mandating that the regional administrator approve an alternative for the entire region. Something to consider, if you wanted an alternative that was between 1B and 1C, we could add an alternative that limits alternative gear marking to just closed areas, but also stipulates that after some period of time, let's say like 3 years or something, the alternative gear marking would be allowed in all waters of the region unless you took an action to prevent that from happening. And then another thing to consider is that by allowing alternatives in the entire region, it would increase fishermen's flexibility in choosing what gear to fish with, right? Because this would allow fishermen to fish with, for example, their on-demand gear all year round and in all locations that they fish, instead of having to make them switch back and forth between different sets of gear depending on when and where they're fishing. And this could be more economical for them and making investing in on-demand gear a more viable option. Okay, alternative set 2 would only be considered if you selected an alternative other than no action in set 1. So I'll just go ahead and read the slide again. So the purpose of alternative set 2 is to reduce the likelihood of incorrect use of approved gear marking alternatives. The need for alternative set 2 is to increase fishermen safety and reduce untimely releases of device retrieval mechanisms and unsuccessful gear retrievals. And alternative 2A is no action, and alternative 2B would require a person to demonstrate knowledge of an approved gear marking alternative in order for them to use it. And so essentially, the intention behind this alternative set is to increase the base level of proficiency for those using alternative gear markings to avoid improper use and any of the resulting negative effects of improper use. There are examples of similar things being done for other fisheries. So one example is the Harbor Porpoise Take Reduction Plans Pinger Training Program. And for that, gillnet gear is required to be equipped with pingers if it's being used in certain areas during certain times. In order to use the pingers, a vessel operator must first complete the pinger training, which boils down to them being educated on how to use pingers. Another example is shark endorsements. To fish for sharks, a vessel owner must obtain a shark endorsement on their highly migratory species permit. And to obtain an endorsement, a vessel owner must watch an educational video and complete a quiz, which is simply intended for educational purposes and doesn't require any sort of set score to pass. Another slightly different example comes from electronic monitoring. So to use electronic monitoring, a vessel must have a NMFS approved vessel monitoring plan. GARFO's monitoring plan guidance provides additional information on requirements for these plans, but one of the requirements is to demonstrate that the EM system is functioning properly by completing what's called a burn-in trip that demonstrates that the vessel's EM system is fully operational. Or authorization to fish with alternative gear markings could be tied to a letter of authorization or LOA. So the issuance of an LOA could be contingent on vessel operators complying with requirements in order to receive an exemption. So in this case, you could set it up so you have to complete some sort of educational component to then be issued the LOA that then exempts you from the gear marking requirements and allows you to fish with an approved alternative. The second meeting of the PDT FMAT was focused around this alternative set. Some PDT FMAT members believed that due to the unique nature of gear marking alternatives and on-demand rig fishing gear, some sort of educational requirement is really necessary to avoid gear conflict and untimely releases and unsuccessful gear retrievals. But even agreeing with the unique complexity of this type of gear, some PDTF MAP members believed that this sort of requirement was really outside the scale and scope of this action, and not enough is known about what approved gear marking alternatives would be in order to appropriately describe or prescribe requirements. Also, it's been pointed out that alternative set 1 would really only be providing additional flexibility to fishermen, whereas alternative set 2 would be providing flexibility, but with more restrictions, right? And because of that, right now, that could potentially slow down rulemaking. So even though there wasn't consensus, the team did agree that this concept should be presented for your consideration. The PDT FMAT also discussed what a possible training, proofs of knowledge, educational requirement might look like. And questions were raised about who specifically would this requirement be placed on? Who would carry out this requirement? So would it be manufacturers, system providers, distributors? Would NOAA Fisheries do it? And then the answer to that could have a big impact on what the requirement would actually look like. And a bit more of the PDT FMAT's discussion is fleshed out in the decision document, which you have, but I think now is just a good time to open it up to the council because we want to hear your thoughts. So we were hoping your discussion could include initiation of the action and any guidance on the action's further development, and we can answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. Maybe I wasn't paying attention enough. There's not, if you go with the unmarked gear, you have to have a pop-up gear with it, or is it going to be able to use without any pop-up gear where they can grapple it? And is there a minimum pot that you're going to have on a trawl?
So right now we don't have any alternatives approved. We weren't thinking that this was going to be for grappling, right? And there wouldn't be any sort of minimum pot per trawl. No. So it's the same regulations. It's just the only difference would be right now to mark the gear, you have to have that persistent buoy line, right? And so this would literally just be changing it so we wouldn't have to have that vertical line in the water. Did that make sense?
Yeah. Mike Penny.
Yeah, if I understand your question, Wes, I think the idea that you would be able to just grapple for your end line and haul your traps without any additional technology would not be consistent with what we're considering in this action, because there would be no way for other vessels coming upon your gear to know that your gear is there. And so when we're talking about gear marking alternatives, we are talking about technologies that would be that the trap trawls would be outfitted with some type of technology that would be the functional equivalent of providing information to oncoming vessels that your gear is there on the bottom. Right, so that the idea with most of the current on-demand pop-up buoy type gears is they're sending a signal to the cloud, which then gets transmitted to a chart plotter or something else that becomes visible to all vessels within a certain range, that the gear is there on the bottom. And it's that, and so you're providing that, the functional equivalency of steaming out and seeing a buoy on the water and knowing that there's gear there. And so what that functional equivalence is, we're still defining, but, as Caroline presented, these technologies are in development and they're evolving quite quickly. And so we would be, setting up a process for the fixed gear fishermen who wish for the opportunity to fish in these restricted areas, to, say, go to a web page and see, okay, well, this company is producing this technology. I'm going to use that. And then they would let us know that that's the technology they're using. And if it's on our list, then that qualifies them to go fish in one of these areas where they would otherwise not be allowed to fish. Hopefully that clarified.
All right, well, is there something besides something that would say that the gear is there? Is there anything in the works where you don't have the cost of actually having the pop-up buoy, that they could just have the cost of the pinger or whatever saying where the rig is, and you could just grapple it up that way?
So yeah, so that distinction would not be part of this action. So when the lobster, when the right whale or the large whale take reduction team is considering alternatives, the idea of not having a pop-up buoy, but still having some sort of technology on the trap that's sending the signal, location signal, and then the vessel, who owns that gear, would come up and grapple for it. I think that is something that the large whale take reduction team is looking at and may authorize. But what we're focused on in this action is providing the alternative to use whatever system is approved for use by the take reduction team in these areas, to use them, but ensure that other vessels have the opportunity to know that the gear is there.
All right, thank you. Sonny?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I thought one of the problems with that was the noise. When you have the ping to go to the boats and they needed at least a mile or better to know where that gear is, the further away it is, the more pings you have, the louder it has to be. And when you start doing that, now you're going to the whales and the marine mammals that you're trying to protect. The noise isn't good for them when you start sending the pings out. And that problem needed to be fixed. So it seems like every problem we come up with, there's another problem that we have to deal with. And perhaps technology has gotten better and we can fix that problem, but I haven't heard that it's been fixed. And that's, I guess, something that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, so I think there's different ways to look at, I don't think the technologies that we're looking at or that are being used are sort of constantly sending an audible ping. I think at one point there was that concept, and you would have a transponder through the hull that would be listening for those sort of audible pings, almost like a sonar detection, right? And that would tell you that the gear's there. As I understand it, and Allie Murphy, who's on the line, and Caroline understand these technologies a lot better than I do. What we're looking at now generally is the person who is, so the lobster pod or whoever is setting the gear, when they set the gear, they're hitting a button on an iPad or on their computer or even on their iPhone, and that is sending a signal to a satellite to the cloud that with a geolocation of where they set their gear. And then once that information is stored in the cloud, it can get sent to everybody with a chart plotter or with an app on their phone to know that that's where the gear is based on the geolocation when the captain set the gear. And so that's not an audible ping that's constantly happening. That's just a signal from the cloud to a chart plotter or an app on an iPhone. The question in terms of like the radius is, when do you come within a certain distance of that before it shows up on your chart plotter? Because you don't want your chart plotter filled up with every trap in the Atlantic Ocean. But you might want to know within 5 nautical miles where the gear is, or 2 nautical miles where the gear is as you're steaming out.
Bobby?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking at this from a different side, still an industry perspective from a different gear usage. To me, seeing the buoy is very important because I need to be able to stay clear and stay away from somebody else's gear. But if we go to a cloud-based or an electronic-based or, you know, something that has no visual markings, is that something now that I'm going to have to pay for that service so I can see where the gear is? I mean, is it a standalone piece of equipment, or is it something that I'm going to have to pay for data usage on? And also, I mean, yes, technology is moving in leaps and bounds, but is it possible that I'll be in a situation where I'm trying to fish in a certain area, and just like many times when I go to log on to WebEx for a meeting, that it decides to update, and now I'm late for the meeting because it's doing whatever. I mean, I have issues about passing on the cost to an unrelated industry. So, and I mean, I think the best approach, in my humble opinion, would be to make it mandatory in areas where it is, you know, it's going to have the most impact, but not necessarily a coast-wide rollout with it yet. But I'm just kind of curious how that's going to look. I mean, it's not that, you know, I'm loaded or anything, but the amount of things that I have to pay for, I mean, that adds up. And this is going to be another thing in that pile. And it's another piece of equipment that I got to figure out where to put, how to mount, how to maintain, and then how to budget and pay for.
So, yeah, right now the intention is for this to eventually show up on chart plotters. So, like mobile fleet, people should not have to pull out an additional app, or if there's all these different systems, they should not have to have like 5 different apps to know where all this gear is, right? So that's the end goal, is wouldn't cost anything extra. It should just be on people's chart plotters.
Well, I'm a little confused on that because I don't have Starlink or anything on my boat, but once I get outside 12 miles, I don't have cell phone service anymore, so I couldn't pick it up on an app anyway. So how would that work? So I would be required to put more equipment. Not only when I set my 1,400 pots, I got to have 70 pop-up buoys. I'd also have to put another computer on to pick up other people's gear.
Allie, do you have an answer on that?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thanks, Allie Murphy from NOAA Fisheries. Thanks for the question. I think that's you know, one possible route that this could go down, that getting information out of the cloud would require internet connectivity. I think another alternative would be that vessels could have equipment on their vessel to be able to detect such gear, you know, on-demand or on-demand rigged gear by itself. So, you know, I think these are there, you know, we're not down a specific path at this point, and there's a lot of research and trialing going on, and you know, no definitive answer at this point, but I think there are different options on how vessels could locate gear on the bottom.
Yeah, so
Hey, Caroline.
right now we have, you know, individual apps like Time Zero that many vessels use to display this data. But yeah, long term, it would end up on chart plotters.
Mike?
Yeah, and I appreciate these questions, and I think what this is pointing to is what the action is doing is facilitating the opportunity for the fixed gear fleet to fish in the areas where they otherwise be restricted due to the right whale protections. But the other piece is, what criteria should me, use to approve these systems as an alternative gear marking approach? And so we haven't defined those yet, in part because the technology is still evolving. But I think if one of the criteria, and I'm inviting the council and and the industry to give us some feedback on that. So if one of the criteria should be it's free to the mobile gear fleet or to other vessels, then let's stipulate that as a point that in order for the technology to be approved for use as an alternative, it has to freely provide the geolocation information to chart plotters. If we want to stipulate how the information is downloaded, is it downloaded at the dock so that it pops up when you go offshore? Is it downloaded via satellite link to the internet? So Starlink would be required on the vessel. Those are different criteria that we can use in order to determine that we should approve or not one of these systems. Because until we approve the systems, while the regs may say that fixed gear fleet has the option to use these systems, until there's some that are approved, there's nothing for them to use. And so, we are trying to get input on what those criteria should be so that what we're approving meets the objectives and the goals of everybody on the water, not just the fixed gear fleet.
Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, kind of on this subject, where you have, the pop-up gear, but more importantly, being able to detect it if either you or another boat. Has the FMAP PDT talked about kind of this in relation to the recreational fisheries that could be occurring in some of these areas? I'm not as familiar with this part of the ocean, but is there like any recreational ground fishing or bottom fishing for the 3 species we talked about most of the day today occurring in some of these areas where anglers would also need to be aware of this gear, so they don't have they don't snag it while they're fishing in places that this fixed gear might also be fishing.
We have not had, the PDT FMAT has not specifically had that conversation. Most of the conversation about location has just been about, would this be best in the closed, here, I'll go back to the map. In these restricted areas or everywhere, right? But no, we haven't specifically talked about the impacts to recreational sector. Yeah.
Johnny?
Thank you for that question. I did a research study some years back and a buoyless research study. And the only problem I had was with recreational head boats and probably recreational boats too, anchoring up in my gear. And they didn't see the buoys, obviously. And I was 3 or 4 times I went back and, my gear was, it weren't bad, but it was definitely tangled up because of recreations.
And sometimes it really doesn't matter if they see the buoys or not, because I've got enough 5-gallon buckets of sinkers in my garage to show you they're gonna get caught in my gear. Greg?
Okay, it's my defense here. Okay, there is wind. Okay, and we do get drag sometimes. So, unfortunately, sorry for dragging your gear. Okay, but even offshore, inshore, when we're tuna fishing or whatever, sometimes we do lay, and we, as we're setting up, we do things change, current or whatever. It's wind against tide or whatever. We do get stuck. So, I'm sorry about that. But if we get it, we promise to let it go.
Oh, by the way, I do get a couple anchors each year too, Greg. Sure. What do you need, a big one? I'll see what I got. Mike?
Yeah, I think, some of these points are sort of contributing to our, their thinking in terms of there's pros and cons, as Caroline mentioned, to, alternative that says, you know, that the option to use alternative gear marking would only be available in these times and places. I mean, note that, you know, these gear restricted areas are limited both in time as well as space, generally in the late winter, early spring. And so, you know, one of the I guess a benefit of the alternative that would only allow it in these times and areas is becomes known, and we can be more, you know, we can communicate that to industry that, you know, from February 1st to April 30th, for example, in these times and places, fixed, you know, this gear may be in use, and it wouldn't be in use in these areas outside of those times and places. You know, the benefit to a more broader allowance of the gear is that it, you know, might be more cost effective for the vessels that are using the gear to not have to, as Caroline said, not have to switch back and forth. So there's pros and cons both ways, and we are looking at those. And you know, we've talked about the idea, and she mentioned this in one of her slides, a letter of authorization that we would provide to the fixed gear vessels who are intending to use this and are using an approved system, in which we could, you know, have them tell us where and when are they going to be setting gear, which would allow us to sort of maintain a database of where this gear is being used, which could help us ensure that all other vessels and fisheries are aware of, you know, where and when this gear is being used.
Stephen?
So my question has to do more with IT security. When I hear cloud, my security ears start perking up. Do we have anybody that's IT security related, kind of advising on that part of it, especially when you start putting data into the cloud, taking data out of the cloud? There's a lot of privacy and other things that you know go along with this. We need to make sure that we're securing that data so that way, you know, we're not getting hacked and things aren't coming up out of the ocean that we don't want to because somebody's hacked it and just started popping these things up out of the ocean. So
Yes, so data security, data management, data governance, all of that, we're thinking about it, but that is a bit outside of the scope of this action, right? So there's a lot of things a lot of decisions that need to be made, a lot of things that need to get ironed out when it comes to, you know, on demand and how the whole system would function. But that's a bit outside of the scope of this particular action. But yeah, we're working with different subject matter experts on that.
Any more questions or comments around the table? Anyone from the audience? Hayden, I believe you have a draft motion ready to go up.
Yes, I do. And I think we need just a second to switch over to that PowerPoint.
Okay. Mike Penny.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, I can make this motion.
All right, somebody like to second the motion? Sonny Gwen? Yeah. Mike, would you like to read it into in the minutes?
So move to initiate the joint New England and Mid-Atlantic Council Omnibus Alternative Gear Marking Framework Adjustment.
pretty much know the rationale, but do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, just, appreciate the council's attention to this. As I think most of you know, this is, in looking at the map, this is much more focused on New England waters where, the right whale issues are more prominent. But in terms of changing regulations and potential expansion of areas that may come out of the upcoming work of the large whale take reduction team, I think it's prudent for this council to be engaged. And while we're not asking the council to select any preferred alternatives today, just initiating the framework allows us to make progress. We certainly can come back and update the council in June on the progress that we've made. I expect we'll get some good feedback from New England next week and the commission and the first week of May. And then the hope is that we would be ready to take final action from this council in October. And then that would allow us to move forward so that the large whale take reduction team would sort of have a good sense of what the playing field is as they make progress on the next phase for potential future additional regulations for right whales. So just rationale is, we need this to move forward to be ready to take final action in October. So I appreciate the council's engagement.
Sonny, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, and also this technology they're coming up with is allowing fishermen to fish in places that they haven't been able to allow to fish before because of the right whale. So it's I'd say it's a win-win situation. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion? All right, seeing none, let's see if we can do this the easy way. Is there any objections to the motion? Seeing none, is there any abstention from the motion? Motion passes by unanimous consent. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Allison. Is there anything else that you need from us?
Nope. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Let's move on to our final agenda item for today. The council awards presentation. We'll be giving away today the 2024 Rick C. Savage Award and the 2025 James A. Rural Cooperative Research Award. And I'm going to move to the back.
Okay.
It is my honor and privilege to present the Rick C. Savage Award, which the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council awards each year to an individual who has made significant contributions to the conservation and management of fishery resources in the Mid-Atlantic region. This award is named in honor of Rick C. Savage, a former council member and chairman who exemplified dedication to collaborative and effective fishery management. Like Rick's, our award recipients are people who have added value to the council process and who have worked tirelessly in support of our shared goals. This year, I am pleased to recognize Captain Adam Nowalski as this year's recipient of the Rick C. Savage Award. Let me give you a little bit of background on Adam. Adam was appointed to the council in 2015 and served with distinction for 9 years before terming out in 2024. During this time, he was consistently one of the council's most engaged and influential voices. He made thoughtful comments, asked insightful questions, and was always willing to roll up his sleeves and dig up into the details, even when the issue was outside his wheelhouse. And through it all, he managed a strong commitment to fairness and balance across both recreational and commercial sectors. As many of you know, Adam was a driving force behind the recreational reform initiative, which we continue to work on today. In 2018, he collaborated on the development of a strategic plan for reforming recreational black sea bass management, and the document helped lay the groundwork for several management actions addressing all 4 of our jointly managed recreational commercial species. In fact, Adam played a key role in the development of the percent change approach. His ability to see all sides, to think outside the box, to speak up respectfully and constructively, and to offer well-being or well-reasoned suggestions make him a trusted colleague and valuable contributor. Council staff will tell you, Adam is always prepared. He reads, it says almost every page, but I think we all know Adam reads every page, and probably the little side notes and everything else. He reads almost every page of our briefing materials. The diligence helped raise the bar for everyone involved, and he made the council process better. In addition to his work on recreational management issues, Adam served as chair of the Research Steering Committee from 2016 to 2021. His leadership during that time was especially important as we navigated complex questions about the futures of the Research Set-Aside program. Adam's contributions to fishery management extends beyond the council. Since 2010, he has served the New Jersey Legislative Proxy as commissioner to the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, where he served as chair of numerous boards. He has also played an instrumental role in bringing the Marine Resource Education Program to the Mid-Atlantic region, and he currently serves as the MREP Steering Committee. Of course, although Adam turned off the council last year, we still occasionally, which I think just about every meeting so far, have seen him around the table as he is still engaged in management of several of our species through his role with the ASMFC boards. Adam, your contributions have left a lasting mark on the council and on the broader Mid-Atlantic fisheries community. Your dedication, integrity, and collaborative spirit exemplify the values this award represents. And on behalf of the council, I am pleased to present you with the Rick Z. Savage Award. Congratulations on your outstanding service.
Take this box out.
Yeah.
So despite what Wes tried to tell you there about me being always prepared, I'm not prepared for this. I'm not even sure I deserve this, quite frankly. I mean, right, you look at me and you say, wow, there's somebody who could just speak in front of the public like this, and here I am, I can't, right? It's truly overwhelming. I look at the list of names of people on that list, Bobby, your father. I could go through the list of them. It would be unfair to pick out other individuals and somehow try to compare myself to that list. I think I'm the first for-hire fisherman to receive the award, I think. I'd like to see more for-hire people here. Greg, Paul, you know, a little incentive for you guys here, you know. My first interaction with this council, interestingly enough, was in 2009, 2010, when we remanded black sea bass. We were looking at a 2.25 million pound ABC at the time. And there was a remand back to the SSC, and now you sit here and give me an award when the next council action after that was to revise your SSC remand policies to basically make sure you could never remand an ABC to the SSC again, right? It's just shocking. I mean, there's so many people to thank. I don't know who nominated me, but I can't thank you enough to the executive committee for approving that nomination. So many council members that came before everyone sitting here today always were willing to talk to me on the phone, help guide me through the process, guide me through decision making. I'll never be able to thank all of them. The state of New Jersey stood behind me, notwithstanding earlier comments here today comparing me to another commissioner who'd been here before me. I guess he was expecting me to talk about history for a long time here today, but I'll let that go. The recreational fishing community in New Jersey supported me for a long time. And obviously, as you all know, all being here today, your family, you're away from them. I don't know, there's lots more I could say. I wanted to give something back. I put together a couple-minute video, bunch of slides, pictures I took through the years. I think a lot of us that sit here from the fishing community talk about what fishing means, and I wanted you to see it through my eyes, right? What does it mean to me? Why do I sit here and put the work in? Why do I hope other people puts the work in? I promise there's no Cheech and Chong in this. For those of you who may recall another council video with that. So I'm just going to stop there. Again, a lot more I could say. I'm just so overwhelmed. Thanks to everyone here. Thanks to everyone who supported me. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you again.
More than one law.
Next, it is my great honor to present the James A. Rule Cooperative Research Award. This award was established in memory of Captain Jimmy Rule, a commercial fisherman, former council member, and a pioneer in cooperative research. Jimmy deeply believed in the power of fishermen and scientists working together and in the value of shared knowledge to improve fishery science and management. The award recognizes individuals who have made outstanding contributions to fishery science and management in the Mid-Atlantic region through cooperative research. Today, I'm honored to present this award to Jack Casey, a true trailblazer whose career embodies the spirit of this award and the legacy of Captain Rule. The individual nominated him for this award described Jack as the father of cooperative research on the East Coast. Come have a seat with me. Born and raised in Turners Fall, Massachusetts, Jack Casey joined the U.S. Navy just 2 days after graduating high school, serving for 4 years on the USS Raymond. After his military service, he spent some time working in a paper mill before deciding to pursue higher education, eventually earning a degree in wildlife management from the University of Massachusetts in 1960. That same year, he began his career with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the Sandy Hook Laboratory in New Jersey. At the time, little was known about sharks, and public perception was shaped more by fear than fact. Jack saw both the need and the opportunity to change that, and he understood early on that partnering with fishermen was essential in doing so. In 1962, he founded the cooperative shark tagging program with fewer than 100 volunteer fishermen. Under his leadership, that program grew into one of the most successful long-term collaborations between fishermen and scientists, resulting in hundreds of thousands of sharks tagged and an unparalleled body of data on shark movements, behavior, and biology. This program became a model for successful, enduring cooperative research. Beyond the tagging program, Jack built a team that explored all aspects of shark life history, from age and growth to reproduction and diet. He was also instrumental in establishing NOAA's Marine Fisheries Laboratory in Narragansett, Rhode Island, where his Apex Predators program continues to thrive. Jack inspired generations of scientists, many of whom continue to carry forward his commitment to collaboration and innovation. This year's award is a particularly fitting tribute, as Jack's early collaborations helped launch the Rules family's long-term involvement in science and research partnerships. On behalf of the Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Management Council, it is a privilege to present the James A. Rule Cooperative Research to Jack Casey, a scientist, mentor, and pioneer in cooperative research. Congratulations, Jack, and thank you for your contributions to the field and to the fishing communities that have benefited from your work. Let's say a few words.
I should quit while I'm ahead. I'd like to do three things while I'm here right now. One is to thank the council for this honor. I really appreciate it. It's something I'll cherish for the rest of my life. Secondly, to just review some of my research over the last 40, 50 years. And thirdly, I'd like to do that as quickly as possible. You've had a long day, you've done a lot, and I'll get you out of here as soon as I can. The program that I started at Sandy Hook initially was supported by sport fishermen that came on very strongly. That was in 1960, 61. 61 is when I started it. In 62, I was in Montauk and I ran into Captain Rule, Phil Roll, who I called the maestro after a while. And we talked about long lining, and I knew he was set up for long lining. He was going to do some exploratory fishing off George's bank. I had some temperature data I could supply him from aerial surveys they were doing at the time. At the time, they were trying to really iron out the Gulf Stream meanders, they thought at the time, and there were meanders, but after satellite data, they turned out to be some rings and those rings bumped along the shelf and concentrated the swordfish sharks at sometimes. Well, we collaborated. He agreed to tag some sharks for me as bycatches, which he did. And more importantly, the fishery at that time was just expanding, and there was a few longliners that he knew, and he opened the door for me to talk to these longliners, and as the fishery expanded, we had very little tagging going on offshore because there wasn't that many people fishing. And that cadre of longliners who said, if Phil Rule supports you, we'll support you. And so the tagging went from along the Atlantic coast, maybe up along the coast of Canada, the Grand Banks. One man fished all the way across and wound up in Spain. But they were fishing in the Gulf of Mexico, the Straits of Yucatan, the Florida Straits, bumping up to the Cuban coast. And the Cubans were quite understanding as a fishing nation. They usually let them off the hook. If they gave them a few dolphin fish, that was appreciated. So and Phil fished in the captain. I keep calling him. There's too many Phils involved in this. So they fished in the Florida Straits, and he caught swordfish that looked like they were ready to spawn. So he left that area and kept it quiet as long as he could. It's and there's the conservation ethic showing in the Rule family. There were other places where small swordfish seemed to concentrate at certain times of the year. They fished away from that. So over the years, I would go aboard the boat. He would come into. I was then at the University of Rhode Island, and I could go over and sort of debrief him at Paris Gondola's dock, and the tales are just wonderful. You look at the data, collected the tagging cards, and we'd spend hours together just talking about what he was seeing at sea. He really was my eyes at sea. And all of his other friends too. They'd meet at Fish Expo in Boston. All the longliners or at least a few of them would meet at one particular place and swap yarns. I would meet them, and there was a camaraderie there. So as a result of this, the program expanded far beyond what I thought it would be. And it really depended on the rules. At first it was Captain Rule, then his sons, Jimmy, and Philly. And I formed such a deep affection for that family that when one of them died and passed away, it was almost like I lost a family member. Let me just tell you 3 quick anecdotes about the rules. Fishing is, we all know, is one of the most dangerous occupations in the world. And the rules have had their close calls and tragedies. And Jimmy told me once, think about this, he's being pulled overboard by one of the towing warps, held onto the stern of the boat, gritted his teeth and told me, he said, if I let go, I was gone. Well, the line straightened out his boot and his foot, gave him a limp for life, but he was still fishing right up until the time he passed away. Philly rule, fishing with his father off Canada, caught a huge longline hook in his throat, up under his jaw. And his father cut the snoot off, taped the shank to his cheek, called the Coast Guard. They sent a helicopter, put him in the Stoke stretcher, swung him aboard. And when they were swinging him aboard, they said, one of the crew members said, "Don't rush, he's not going to make it." And Philly told me, he said, I told him in blue, or thought in blue language, "You get me ashore, I'll make it." Well, it was a pretty serious operation coming up. His mother flew up from the States, and they told him he might lose his voice and some of the muscles in his throat. And so it was a touch and go. 2 weeks later, he took the tracheotomy out of his throat himself. So the roles are as hard as nails. One final story that's not a tragedy. Philly was the tragedy that he went down with his boat. And we all regretted that so, and felt so bad that that happened. He was the last man on the boat, of course. So the last story is Phil Rule, the captain, the maestro. As a young man, fished quite young, very young, off of New York, and he was fishing single-handed in a boat towing, and the net pulled him overboard. And he went overboard, but the net, he told me, the net slacked off as soon as it hit the bottom, and he popped to the surface and got aboard the boat. And he said everything happened so fast that the inside of his hat was still dry. So there were some good stories, and many of them. I won't bore you with us anymore. I never was bored, but my final comment will be thank you. Thank the council so much for this award, and thank the rules for being who they were fishing and who they were for me. Thank you very much.
Bobby. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to reiterate that I've had the great fortune of, and actually didn't know it for quite some time as a child, that somebody that I considered a dear family friend, who was referred to as an uncle, was as world renowned as he is. Now, I've had the great fortune of knowing him my entire life and knowing him my entire adult life. Still kind of awestruck in one sense when I talk to people in academia and kind of name drop how much weight your name carries. And it's, I mean, it's kind of like, oh, hey, I have dinner with a guy. I know him all the time. But, you know, you instilled in my family the understanding and the need for that science and industry working together is going to create nothing but good. And even though it doesn't really seem like it, you're a big part of why I'm sitting at this table now, why my father sat at it for 9 years prior to that, why he did everything that he did. Part of that, I mean, some of it was Dad was a little scared of my grandfather. Most people here have never met him. He was a tiny man that was huge. It was unbelievable. Same thing, you know, I had utmost respect for my father, still scared to death of him. You know, so I just like we don't want to let any of the other generations down, but I just wanted you to know that you're a big reason of why our family does what it does, operates like it is. You know, you showed us that it's a two-way street. It's not, you know, prior to my grandfather working with you, and you know the stories well better than, you know, far better than I do. Academia looked down upon industry. You know, people that were fishermen that were, you know, on the ocean day to day. Your observations don't matter because you're not educated enough to understand what you're looking at. And he completely broke that mold, shattered it into a million pieces, and showed the world what can happen when you put different, you know, people of different background together and still working for the same goal. So, Dr. Casey, I want to thank you for being a friend to my family for as long as you have. from the bottom of my heart, my father's heart, my uncle's heart, and my grandfather's. Thank you very much.
Both ways. Bobby, thank you. Thank you.
All right, with that, that concludes today's agenda items. We have hospitality 491. Just a couple minutes for us to get up there, I guess. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. See everyone then. Thank you.